Black and broke, that's what you look like. Step off these steps before I drag you. The officer's voice cracked across the courthouse plaza like a whip. His hand shot out before anyone could react, gripping the woman's arm with a force that wasn't procedure, it was punishment. Gasps surged through the midday crowd. Phones lifted, heads turned. On the marble steps of justice, humiliation had just been declared out loud. She didn't flinch. Not when his fingers dug into her coat sleeve. Not when his partner moved in with cuffs already open, hungry for a scene. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. She wore no robe, no medallion of office, just a long beige coat brushing her knees, dark slacks, a white shirt clean against the sunlight, a black leather case in hand. To anyone blind with bias, she was no one, just another black woman walking too close to the machinery of power. Restricted zone. The second officer barked. People like you think you can slip past with a cheap smile. Not today. The first twisted her wrist harder, projecting for the bystanders. This ain't staff. Look at her, no clearance badge, no ID. Another fraud trying to sneak in. The cuffs snapped. Cold metal bit into her wrists. She didn't resist. Her eyes stayed forward, anchored, calm. Not fear, not rage. Something deeper, something steadier. A student at the edge of the crowd muttered into his live stream. This is racial profiling. They're cuffing her for existing. His phone shook, but his voice was steady, feeding thousands already watching online. Hands behind your back, the officer repeated louder now. Trespassing, possible fraud, typical. That word typical cut deeper than the cuffs. It wasn't policy, it was prejudice dressed as law. Then came the shove. Hard, merciless, slamming her against the hood of the squad car. The thud silenced the square. The officer leaned close, spitting venom only thinly disguised as authority. This courthouse isn't for you. Go back where you belong. A chorus of outrage broke from the crowd. That's racist, someone yelled. She didn't do anything, another cried. But the officers didn't budge. And through it all, she remained still, hair pulled back, jaw set, the leather case trembling at her fingertips. Not broken, not defeated, waiting, because hidden in that case was the truth. A truth about to spill open on these very steps, in front of every lens, every witness, every voice that thought they knew where she belonged. She didn't just stand at the courthouse. She carried it. Her name was Judge Naomi Carter, but out here on the courthouse steps, no one spoke it. To the officers, she was just another disruption to be contained. To the crowd, she was a stranger under arrest. Naomi knew this dance. She had seen it before too many times. Years earlier, at 24, she'd been mistaken for a defendant in her own courtroom because she walked in without the robe. At 32, she'd been stopped by security outside a conference where she was scheduled to keynote. Each time, the same pattern: suspicion first, respect only if proven. Silence had been her armor then, and silence was her weapon now. She shifted slightly against the hood of the police car, the leather case still dangling by its strap. That case wasn't just an accessory. Inside it lay the final signed confirmation of her appointment, sealed, notarized, undeniable. She had carried it herself instead of sending it through staff. A reminder that the seat she held wasn't just given, it was fought for. The crowd couldn't see all that. They only saw a black woman in a beige coat, her wrists locked in steel. She doesn't look like a judge, someone whispered, shaking their head. Another voice shot back. What does a judge look like to you? The live stream picked up every word. Comments poured in. Racial profiling again. Seattle PD at it. She's too calm, something's up. Thousands were watching, but Naomi didn't lift her head. She didn't need the camera. She had the steps, the cuffs, and the truth waiting to fall open. The younger officer, eager to prove himself, leaned close. Why so quiet? Guilty people always go silent. His smirk lingered, certain he'd already won. But silence is not guilt, it's control. Naomi's mind slipped for a moment to a different set of steps. Charlotte, age 16. She'd been waiting outside a hotel lobby in her Sunday best. A clerk told her, guests only, and ushered her out to the sidewalk like a trespasser. That sting had never left. It lived in her spine, in the way she stood now, unbroken, even with her wrists bound. The courthouse loomed behind her, stone columns rising like sentinels. Ironically, She was closer to it than anyone else, pressed against its shadow, bearing its weight. Around her, tension built like a storm. The student live streaming whispered into his mic, "She hasn't said a word. That's power. That's not fear." And he was right. Naomi wasn't silent because she had nothing to say. She was silent because the story wasn't finished yet. "Stand still." The officer's command rang out sharp, unnecessary. Her hands were already cuffed, her body already pinned to cold metal. But this wasn't about control. It was about spectacle. His partner stepped forward, voice carrying over the restless crowd. "This one's a fraud, probably forged papers. We've seen this before." He held her ID high, as if it were contraband instead of credentials. "Nothing checks out. Not her. Not today." "Oh." The crowd rippled with murmurs, some skeptical, some outraged. A man near the front muttered, "How would you know? You didn't even run it." A woman further back said, "She booked no badge? She's just standing there." The younger officer sneered. "Exactly. Standing here like she owns the place." His eyes raked over her coat, her shoes, her silence. Bias dressed as observation. "People like this think they can slip through, flash a case, walk like they belong, but we know better." "Oh?" Phones tilted higher. The live stream counter ticked upward. Comments scrolled faster. "She's too calm. This is ugly. Why are they assuming?" The first officer pressed harder, pushing her shoulder into the hood of the cruiser. "Trespassing confirmed," he declared, louder now, as if volume could make fiction into fact. "Resisting verification, possible obstruction." Her leather case trembled at the edge of the hood, still clutched by the strap. One shove too hard, and it would slip. But Naomi Carter didn't fight. She didn't plead. She let the silence stretch, an invisible rope tightening around the officers instead. A voice broke the air, a clerk from inside the courthouse, hesitating at the doorway. "Wait, I think—" He froze at the glare shot his way by the younger cop. The message was clear. Stay out of it. He stepped back, lips pressed shut. And yet the seed was planted. The crowd's murmur grew sharper, louder. "This doesn't look right." "Ugh." They didn't even ask her name. Typical. Every time it's someone who looks like her. The officer smirked, feeding on the whispers. "You hear that? Even the crowd knows. Standard procedure." He wasn't listening. He was performing. For his partner, for the cameras, for himself. Naomi lifted her head an inch, just enough for the sunlight to catch her eyes. Calm, focused, unmoved. Because escalation was exactly what they wanted, and exactly what she was about to use. The hood of the squad car burned under the afternoon sun, pressing heat into her cheek. The officer's hand pinned her harder than necessary, his voice dripping with certainty. "Fraud, trespasser, another nobody trying to play the system." His words sprayed into the air like accusations already proven. But Naomi Carter said nothing, not a plea, not a protest, only silence. And silence has a weight. It carried over the murmuring crowd. It cut through the officer's performance. It spread like a pause no one could fill. The younger officer leaned in, smirk carved into his face. "Quiet now, huh? Guilty people always go quiet." He tapped the cuffs around her wrists, steel biting against skin. "Don't worry. You'll get your turn inside. Not the courtroom, the holding cell." Still, no response. Her eyes stayed on the reflection in the windshield, her own face framed by stone columns towering above. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the courthouse, the seat of justice she already carried within her. Phones shook as people tried to capture every second. The live stream chat exploded. "She's not fighting? That's strength. Why so calm? What does she know? Something's off. She's not ordinary." Her silence unsettled more than if she had screamed. Even the officer's grip wavered for a breath, his smirk flickering. He expected resistance. He wanted it. Without it, he was shouting into a void. She remembered another silence, years back. At 24, outside a boutique hotel, exhausted from travel, card and ID in hand. The clerk looked her over and said, "You don't look like someone who belongs here." They denied her entry. She had slept in her car that night, swearing she would never beg again for a space she had earned. That vow lived in her still. And now, cuffed on these courthouse steps, she honored it. The officer barked again, louder this time, desperate to fill the gap. "Onlookers, step back. Nothing to see here." His tone betrayed him. Because there was everything to see here. Naomi drew one slow breath, shoulders steady. chin lifted just enough to meet the eyes of the crowd, not the officers, not her accusers. The crowd, witnesses, carriers of truth. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The courthouse had already heard enough. At first, the square was a blur of phones and whispers. People wanted the shot, not the truth. But then the silence stretched too long, and something shifted. A law student standing near the fountain raised his voice just enough for his live stream mic to catch it. "You're cuffing her without cause. That's profiling. That's illegal." His feed was already climbing into the thousands, comments flooding in. "Get her name. Show the officers' faces. Tag the courthouse location." The officer heard him and snapped, "Back off. This doesn't concern you." But it did. Everyone knew it. A gray-haired woman with a shopping bag shook her head, muttering, "She didn't do anything. She was just walking in." Another voice carried louder, from a man in a navy suit. "I saw her here last week. She belongs inside." The crowd stirred. What began as murmurs grew teeth. Phones angled higher. Someone shouted, "Badge number, read it out." The younger officer stiffened, covering his chest plate with one hand. "Keep moving," he barked, but his voice cracked under the rising wave. And then the first crack in the facade. From the courthouse doors, a clerk in a pale shirt hesitated. His eyes darted from Naomi, cuffed against the cruiser, to the officers holding her. I think she's on today's docket," he said, barely above a whisper. But the live stream caught every word. The crowd erupted. "You heard him. Check the records. She's legit." The older officer snarled. "Step back inside before you lose your job." The clerk froze, torn between fear and conscience. His silence now hung heavier than Naomi's. Naomi hadn't moved. Her eyes locked on the clerk, just for a moment. And in that glance was recognition. "I don't need you to save me, but you can save yourself by speaking." The student's live stream jumped past 5,000 viewers, his voice steadier now. "They're trying to erase her. We're all seeing it. Keep recording." Phones multiplied. Screens lit the plaza like stars in daylight. The officers tightened their hold, but they were no longer in control. Too many witnesses, too many angles. And through it all, Naomi remained still anchored, waiting, while strangers began to carry the fight for her. The younger officer slammed the cruiser door open with a clang that echoed across the plaza. "Get her inside," he barked to his partner. "She's done." But the crowd wasn't silent anymore. "She hasn't even been identified," someone shouted. "You can't cuff someone just for standing here," another added. The officer smirked, pulling Naomi closer. "Watch us." His partner lifted her ID again, waving it like a weapon. "This is fake. We see these all the time. Printed cards, stolen names, cheap tricks." He tossed it onto the hood like it was garbage. The live stream zoomed in, catching every motion, every word. Comments rolled like a flood. "That's theft. They didn't even scan it. Looks official to me. Why won't they check?" A businessman in a gray suit stepped forward, phone in hand. "I've worked downtown for 20 years. I've seen scams. This isn't one." She walked up like she knew exactly where she was going. "Step back," the older officer barked. His hand hovered near his taser, and the crowd recoiled, a ripple of fear breaking their momentum. But fear turned to fury in seconds. "You're escalating this," a woman cried. "You're abusing authority," another said. The clerk at the courthouse door clenched his fists. He had spoken once, too quietly. Now he whispered to himself, louder, as if rehearsing, "Her name is on the docket. I saw it. I know I did." His breath hitched, torn between truth and consequence. Naomi remained motionless. Her silence screamed louder than the officers' voices. Each insult, each shove, each denial only amplified the injustice everyone was recording. The younger officer leaned closer to her ear, venom disguised as procedure. "You thought walking in with a coat and a case would fool us? Not today. People like you never belong here." That phrase, "people like you," spilled into the plaza, sharper than any siren. Dozens of phones caught it, and gasps rippled like a wave. The law student streaming live spoke directly into his mic. "You all heard that. This isn't about procedure. It's about prejudice. It's about erasing her because of who she island." Viewers surged past 10,000. The officers didn't notice. Or maybe they didn't care. The cuffs clinked again as Naomi shifted slightly, her case trembling on the cruiser's hood, ready to slip. She steadied her balance, eyes calm, unbroken, because she knew escalation was their game. But exposure, that would be hers. The shove came harder this time. Naomi's body slammed against the cruiser's hood with a hollow thud that made the entire plaza wince. The sound carried a dull, cruel punctuation no one could ignore. "Stay down," the older officer barked, pressing her cheek to the hot metal. The younger one smirked, leaning close so everyone could hear. "This courthouse isn't for you. It never was. Go back to where you belong." The words dropped like stones. Racism, naked and unmasked. The crowd erupted. "That's racist." "You can't say that." Phones zoomed in, catching every line of tension on Naomi's face, every ounce of power in her stillness. The student live streaming nearly shouted into his mic now. "You heard that. Every one of you heard that. This is not law enforcement, it's humiliation." But the officers doubled down. The younger one tapped the cuffs, tightening them until the steel bit deeper into her wrists. "Frauds get treated like frauds. Typical." He spat the word again like a verdict. A woman in the crowd stepped forward, trembling but furious. "You're hurting her. She showed you ID. She belongs here more than you do." The taser came up flashing yellow plastic, a threat humming with electricity. The officer pointed it at the crowd, voice sharp. "Step back or you're next." Fear surged, but so did resolve. The businessman in the gray suit lifted his phone higher. "We're not backing down. We're recording everything." The clerk at the courthouse door finally shouted, louder than he intended. "Her name is on the docket. She's supposed to be here." His voice cracked, but it carried across the steps. Gasps followed. The crowd roared. The younger officer spun, barking, "Shut your mouth before you lose your job." But it was too late. The words were out. The truth was loose. Naomi's leather case slipped further across the hood, teetering on the edge. One more shove, and it would spill. She closed her eyes briefly, steadying her breath. The silence remained her shield. Phones kept rolling. Live stream numbers soared past 20,000. The plaza had turned into a stage, the officers into villains of their own making. The insult, the shove, the taser, all of it was now evidence. Evidence the world was watching in real time. And Naomi Carter? She wasn't broken. She was waiting. Because humiliation is not the end. It's the moment before truth takes the microphone. The next shove was the hardest yet. Her body jolted against the hood, the leather case snapping free from her grip. It tumbled down the slanted metal and landed on the courthouse steps with a sharp crack. Papers spilled, fanning across the stone like a sudden storm. The crowd gasped. Phones dove lower to catch it all. One document slid further than the rest, its gold seal flashing in the sunlight. A bystander bent down instinctively, lifting it with careful hands. His eyes scanned the bold lettering, his mouth falling open. Appointed Judge of District Court, Naomi Carter, confirmed by the State Supreme Court. The words rang out louder than the officer's commands. The plaza froze. The younger cop snapped, "Give that back. That's fake." He reached for the paper, but the man stepped away, voice rising. "This isn't fake. This is official, sealed and signed." The live stream zoomed in on the document. Thousands of comments exploding. "Judge? She's the judge?" They cuffed a judge on her own steps. The officers faltered. Their performance cracked under the weight of evidence. Still, the older one barked, "Forgery! Anyone can print a stamp." But even his tone wavered. The clerk from the courthouse door rushed forward now, face pale. "She is on the docket. She's scheduled to preside today." His voice broke, but the truth carried. "You just cuffed the judge." The crowd erupted, shouts overlapping. "Uncuff her now. She belongs here more than you do. Release her." "How?" Naomi finally lifted her head, eyes meeting the crowd. Calm. Certain. She hadn't needed to move. The case had spoken for her. The younger officer's hand shook around his taser. He lowered it slowly, realization dawning that the cameras weren't just recording a scene, they were recording his downfall. The gold seal gleamed brighter in the sun, undeniable. Naomi Carter stood cuffed but undefeated. And for the first time since the steel closed around her wrists, the silence wasn't hers alone. It belonged to the officers, to the system that thought it could erase her. The truth had spilled, and there was no taking it back. The plaza held its breath. Papers still fluttered on the marble, the gold seal shining like a spotlight no one could dim. Naomi straightened slowly, cuffs biting her wrists, but her spine unbent. She turned her face toward the officers, voice calm but resonant enough to carry across the square. "Remove these cuffs." She paused, letting the silence sharpen. "I am Judge Naomi Carter. And this, she lifted her bound hands toward the columns, is my court. The words hit harder than any shove. Phones shook as people screamed into their live streams. She said she's the judge. They cuffed the judge. Comments cascaded. Unbelievable. They really did it. Power. Pure power. The younger officer stammered, No, she's lying. This is a setup. But his voice cracked, thin against the roar of the crowd. The clerk stepped forward, document clutched tight. It's true. Judge Naomi Carter was sworn in last week. I saw the confirmation. I filed it myself. His voice wavered, but conviction anchored it. The businessman in the gray suit shouted, Uncuff her now. Others joined, She's the judge. You humiliated her. The square turned into a chorus, the demand undeniable. Naomi lifted her chin, eyes steady. You thought silence meant weakness. You mistook patience for submission. That is your last mistake. The officers froze. The cuffs suddenly felt like shackles on their own wrists, the weight of cameras heavier than the steel around hers. One by one, phones captured the moment, the younger officer fumbling with the key, unlocking metal that had no right to close in the first place. The cuffs snapped open, falling to the ground with a metallic clink that echoed louder than sirens. Naomi rubbed her wrists lightly, then placed her hands on the cruiser's hood, not in defeat, but in ownership. The stage was hers now. You dragged me here as an intruder, she said, voice cutting clean. But I do not intrude. I preside. Remember that. The crowd erupted, a mix of cheers and outrage, a tide of vindication washing across the steps. Live stream numbers surged past 50,000. Naomi Carter had spoken her name, and with it, she had flipped the script. The moment the cuffs clattered onto the stone, the entire plaza seemed to shift. Authority no longer radiated from the badges. It radiated from the woman who had just named herself. The younger officer stepped back, palms slick with sweat. His voice stumbled out, a pathetic echo of his earlier bravado. This can't be right. She tricked us. But even as he said it, his own eyes betrayed him. He had seen the seal. He had heard the clerk. And now the world was watching him flounder. The older officer, face drained of color, muttered something about protocols and miscommunication, but his hands shook as he holstered the cuffs. Every movement was being recorded. Every hesitation, every falter would live forever online. The prosecutor, silent until now, tried to step forward, tie tightening at his throat. There must be some mistake, he insisted. Her credentials. The clerk cut him off, louder this time, steadier. There is no mistake. Judge Carter was sworn in. I processed her paperwork myself. His words cracked like a gavel, final and unyielding. The businessman in the gray suit sneered at the prosecutor. You sat there and let them drag her down those steps. You knew. Others in the crowd picked it up. You knew. You watched. Fingers pointed, anger redirected. Phones stayed locked on the officers, but now they also turned toward the prosecutor, his reputation unraveling in real time. The younger officer's smirk was gone, replaced with a hollow stare. He looked at Naomi as though seeing her for the first time, not as a suspect, not as a trespasser, but as the embodiment of authority he could no longer touch. Naomi didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply stood straighter, rolling her shoulders as though shaking off invisible dust. The crowd erupted around her, chants rising. Judge Carter. Judge Carter. Justice on the steps. Oh. The live stream comment bar burned with vindication, from humiliation to power in minutes. They're finished. She carried herself like a storm the whole time. The officers looked smaller now, diminished by the weight of truth. Even their uniforms seemed flimsy, fabric stretched too thin to shield them from accountability. The prosecutor lowered his eyes, retreating into the background, trying to melt into the marble. But the lenses followed him, unforgiving. For the first time since the arrest began, Naomi allowed herself a long breath, not relief resolve, because collapse wasn't the end. It was the beginning of consequences. And every single person who had played a part in trying to erase her now stood in the wreckage of their own choices. The square was no longer theirs. The officers, the prosecutor, the uniforms, they had all lost command. Eyes no longer followed badges. They followed her. Naomi Carter lifted her wrists, the faint red lines from the cuffs still visible. She didn't hide them. She let the crowd see, let the cameras capture. Evidence carved into her skin. Her voice carried clean, cutting through the chaos like a blade. Officers, she said, turning directly toward the men who had dragged her. "You are suspended, effective immediately. Internal Affairs will have your reports, your footage, and your words. Every insult you spat today is already on record." Ugh. The younger officer's knees buckled. He opened his mouth to argue, but no sound came. The crowd shouted over him anyway. "Suspended! You heard her." Naomi's gaze shifted to the prosecutor, who had been retreating inch by inch into the background. "And you," she said, her tone icy, "sat by and let this happen. You encouraged it. You used the weight of this court to humiliate its very judge. You will face contempt charges. Consider this your notice." Gasps rippled, the prosecutor's face drained of blood. "Judge Carter, Enough." Her single word slammed harder than a gavel. Phones captured every syllable, every expression, every downfall. Livestream comments erupted. "She's firing them on the steps." "Contempt charge live, this is history." Her power is unreal. Naomi stepped forward, reclaiming the steps as though they had been built for this moment. The officers shrank back. The prosecutor bowed his head. Even the clerk who had first hesitated now stood taller, vindicated by her presence. "You called me an intruder," she continued, voice steady, resonant. "You dragged me in chains before the very courthouse I preside over. That humiliation was not mine to carry. It is yours, and it will follow you into every record, every file, every review." The younger officer whispered, almost pleading, "We didn't know." Naomi's eyes cut through him. "You didn't want to know." The crowd roared, cheers mixing with righteous fury. 50,000 live stream viewers turned into 60, then 70. The story was no longer just unfolding, it was spreading like wildfire. Naomi stood unmoved in the center, the storm's calm eye, as those who had tried to erase her now found themselves erased instead. Justice hadn't waited for the courtroom, justice had arrived on the steps. The square was thunder, cheers, shouts, the hum of live stream alerts vibrating in pockets. But at the center, Naomi Carter moved with unshaken calm. Each step she took toward the courthouse was deliberate, her heels striking the marble like a drumbeat of authority. The officers hung back, stripped of their posture. The prosecutor stood still, face ashen, collar damp with sweat. The clerk by the doorway straightened, his eyes shining with the strange relief of someone who finally spoke truth. Naomi reached the bottom stair and paused. The crowd fell into a hush, as if the air itself knew the moment demanded silence. She turned slowly, facing them all, the phones, the faces, the country watching live. "You called me an intruder," she began, her voice low even. "You tried to erase me from the very courthouse I was appointed to lead, and you thought silence meant I had no power." Her gaze swept across the officers, the prosecutor, the sea of strangers who had witnessed it all. But silence is not weakness. Silence is patience. And today, patience delivered justice. The words rolled heavy, undeniable. The crowd erupted, not with noise but with applause that sounded like thunderclaps against stone. She lifted her chin, eyes steady on the courthouse behind her. Justice does not live in badges. It does not live in prejudice. Justice lives in truth, and truth walked these steps with me. Her hand brushed the railing, a quiet gesture that felt like a claim. Then, sharper, she delivered the final strike. "You called me a trespasser at the courthouse I preside over. That wasn't just an insult to me. That was an insult to justice itself, and justice doesn't forget." Phones caught every syllable. The live stream counter soared past 100,000. Hashtags ignited in real time. Number Judge Carter, number Justice on the steps, number Power in silence. Naomi turned, walking up the final steps. Her coat swayed in the breeze, her leather case once more in hand, papers safely gathered. She crossed the threshold as the heavy doors swung open, the building greeting her like it had been waiting all along. Behind her, the crowd erupted again, cheers, chants, applause rising into the afternoon sky. Strangers shouted her name, voices colliding into a chorus. "Judge Carter! Judge Carter!" She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Justice had already entered, and it entered with her.